recent U.S. Census took stock of, youth and adults and children, where they're living, what they're doing. And it talked about young adults. And the census said that 60% of males and 60 and 50% of females are still living at home at the age of 25. And so over half of the young adults are living at home past 18 all the way to the age of 25. And 20 to 25% of males and 15% of females are still living at home at the age of 35. Now this group of people in the world have been labeled kidults because they're kids, but they're adults, and they do some kid things and some adult things, and they don't really belong to any group. In the book Do Hard Things, it says, around 1800, the year 1800, young people of both sexes could reckon on being considered adults as soon as the outward signs of puberty made their appearance. Girls attained marriageable age at 15. Boys could join the Prussian army as officer cadets at the age of 15. Among the upper classes, entry to university or to a profession was possible at the age of 15 or 16. The school leaving age, and consequently the end of childhood, was raised during the 19th century to 14. So, in history, you were one of two things. You were either a child or you were an adult. And when you were an adult, you took on all of the adult responsibilities. You left home, you provided for yourself, you took care of yourself, you went to school, you had a trade, you were in an apprenticeship, and then eventually you purchased land, home, had a family, all of those things. And girls often married in their mid-teen years to men in their early 20 years who could provide for them. Now today, life expectancy has increased by a lot. In the last 50 years, life expectancy in the United States has gone from 70 years to 80 years. In the world, it's gone from 50 to 70 years. And during most of the history of mankind, the life expectancy was between 30 and 40 years old from birth. So anybody that was actually born might live the average of 30 to 40 years. If you lived to the age of 21, because there were so many deaths during birth and childhood, if you lived to the age of 21, you could expect to live to the age of 50 to 60. If you were 50 years old, you were an old man. And now people are living to be 80 plus years old. I mean, many of us can expect that. We need to plan for that. And what that means is that we have more leisure time than we've ever had before. Not just because we live longer, but because now we also have all of our modern technologies that enable us to have greater amounts of time. And so we face a problem that's never been faced in the world, and that is huge amounts of time. And we've got to figure out what in the world we're going to do with all this time. What's happening right now, the solution to this greater amount of time in a lot of homes and families is that children are staying children longer and longer. Parents are keeping them at home. They're staying at home, allowing children to stay at home until 25 on average. You know, half of them are at home. 35, there's still a good percentage of them at home. And they're paying for their college, they're paying for cars, clothes, entertainment, taking care of the children, doing things for a 20, 21, 22-year-old that in history would have only been done for a much younger child. Now this is a problem because it's enabling these young adults to go without taking on responsibilities. And they're the biggest losers, ironically. They think, I mean, we all think we want to be taken care of. We think we want people to do things for us and buy things for us. But the truth is that what we really need is to take care of ourselves completely and learn how to do that well. And then learn to take care of others, because that's where the greatest joys in life are, to build a lucrative career for ourselves, to marry and have to take care of someone else and watch out for their needs and put our needs second, and then to have children. And people are doing none of those things. They might still be getting an undergraduate education, but they're not becoming creators. There's very few owners. There's fewer and fewer marriages. smaller and smaller amounts of children. And all of this is about this problem of responsibility. And Do Hard Things, the Harris twins say, with all this money and attention focused on teens, the teen years are viewed as some sort of vacation. Society doesn't expect much of anything from young people during their teen years except trouble, and it certainly doesn't expect competence, maturity, and productivity. They said that they typed in their computer the words teens and expectations because their book is all about increasing expectations with teens, and teens taking a stand with adults and saying, no, I can do more and I can be more. They said when they put in that search in Google, what popped up was teens and drugs, teens and alcohol, teens and smoking, teens and drinking, teens and marijuana, teens and cell phones. Those are the expectations that adults have of teens. And when the adult population sets a specific expectation, people tend to follow that expectation. And so that's what we're getting. That's what we're reaping, is a lot of teens that are at home, that are not taking care of themselves, and that are getting into trouble because, again, they have a lot of time, and they have adult bodies, and they have adult minds from the standpoint that their brains have changed and they can think abstractly, and yet they have all this time and not enough responsibility. It's a responsibility vacuum. It really is a major problem, and because they don't have to provide for themselves more things, you know, it's like the other day I was talking to a man and I was telling him that my son is 17 and he's running a window washing business, and my daughter's 15, and she walked in the other day and she says, I'm sick of not having any money, I'm gonna take babysitting flyers around the neighborhood. And this man said, oh, I wish my children would do that. And I said, well, I just don't buy things for them. I make them buy their own clothing and pay for their own entertainment, and they're supposed to pay for half of their college. And he said, oh, I wish we didn't pay for our kids' stuff. And I said, well, it's choice. You can decide that you don't want to pay for more of your children's things, that you want to lay the responsibility for themselves on their own shoulders so that while they're teens and into their early young adult years, they learn to take responsibility for themselves entirely, so that when it comes time to take care of a family, that's an extension of what they already know how to do well. These Harris twins talk about this article about teen expectations that they ran across. It's really funny. It says this, quote, when you formally develop a set of expectations for your teen, you begin to set your teen up for succeeding in meeting those expectations. And so they make the comment, we're reading this and we're thinking, great, this is going to be great, but maybe not. They go on, the author proceeded to list suggested expectations for teens divided up by age group. First, preteens and younger teens, ages 10 to 14, are expected to, according to this article, this is what you should expect your 10 to 14-year-old to do. Make their bed every day, be able to take a message on the phone, and clean their room every week with help from mom and dad. So while 100 to 200 years ago, these 14-year-olds, including Gandhi, who married at 13, were expected to take on the responsibilities of family, these children can clean their room if mom and dad help. It's amazing the huge difference. Then comes older teens, 15 and up. Besides everything on the younger teens list, you're expected to do a daily chore, just one, and then take out the trash, make sure the gas gauge stays above a quarter of a tank. So you can take on the responsibility of human lives in a vehicle, but you're only expected to make sure that there stays gas in the car. Not necessarily pay for it, not put it in, not, check the oil, not pay the insurance, any of those kinds of things. Clean your room every week with no help from mom and dad. And then the Harris twins comment that the article includes encouragement to parents about the list. Please do not feel that your teenager should be doing all of them. The Harris twins say, whew, we're getting worried there. That teens are going to have to take on too much. Now, here's the biggest problem. Not only that these teens and young adults are missing out on so many opportunities in the world, but also that the only way to increase human capacity is through taking on greater responsibility. So if you never try to do things that you haven't done before, then your capacity will not increase. And what you will discover is that at 25 and 35 and 45 and 55, you can do no more things than you could do when you were younger. And that's one of the great joys of life, should be that we can increase our capacity in the world. We can think deeper and better. We can problem solve in more creative ways. We can handle greater amounts of stress and manage problems in life in adult ways. And when we keep ourselves sheltered from many adult responsibilities, then we don't get that opportunity to increase our capacity, and therefore we stay stuck. You know, we expect children to read more and harder things, to write more difficult papers, to expand their group of friends from the neighborhood out into the community, to be in lessons and get good at sports and arts and music. And then we hit adulthood, and that pace slows way down if it doesn't stop almost entirely. We get stuck in a job, we do it year after year, you know, and if we don't choose greater responsibilities, we can't expand ourselves and become more than we used to be. In the book Mainspring of Human Progress, the author talks about the concept of responsibility, and this is how he explains it. Your thoughts and actions are under your own control. Thousands of men and women have suffered torture and even death without speaking a word that their persecutors tried to make them speak. Your freedom to act may be forbidden, restricted, or prevented by force. A robber, kidnapper, or jailer may bind your hands and feet and put a gag in your mouth. But the fact remains that no amount of force can make you act unless you agree, perhaps with hesitation and regret, to do so. I know this all sounds hair-splitting and academic, but it leads to a very important point. In fact, to two important points. One, individual freedom is the heritage of each living person. And two, freedom cannot be separated from responsibility. In other words, even if you're being tortured, you still have a choice, and because you still have a choice, there's a responsibility attached. And so we can't be human beings and live in this world unless we recognize emotionally, deeply, concretely that every day we are choosing, and every day we must take on responsibility for the choices that we make. And it's the very essence of what responsibility is to recognize that because we choose, we must take responsibility for those choices. And as we do, that's what being mature is, and that's what being a real adult is. He goes on, your natural freedom, your control over your own life energy was born in you along with life itself. It is a part of life itself. No one can give it to you, nor can you give it to someone else, nor can you hold any other person responsible for your acts. Control simply can't be separated from responsibility. Control is responsibility. So because we have control of ourselves, and to the extent that we have control of ourselves, we have greater responsibility for those choices. And people in higher and higher levels of responsibility and leadership have greater consequences for the choices that they make because there's so much more responsibility attached to their choices. Mortimer Adler said, one sign that you are a grown-up, that you are no longer a child, is that you never regard any part of study or learning as work. As long as learning or study has anything compulsory about it, you are still in the condition of childhood. And so that's what we need to become better at doing, and that is responding as adults would respond. We are response-able, which is what responsible means. And so to the level at which you are able to respond as the most mature, fully developed adult would respond, the more influence that you have, because people see in you that level of maturity that they want to follow. And so that's what we need to do, is become more and more adept at responding as adults should respond. My husband was working with one of my sons on his math, and this son struggles with math and through tantrums, and the response, the natural response for my husband, was to get angry in return, to yell back at him, to throw consequences at him. And one day when they were working together, my husband stopped in the middle of this argument and recognized that if he ever expected our son to respond at a more mature level, if he ever expected our son to increase in his emotional capacity to respond to situations and to stress, he was going to have to model it. He was going to have to show our son, look, this is how you handle this kind of problem when you're more mature. And our son needed to see that more mature emotional response so he could learn to emulate it, and he could see, oh, you're happier and things go more smoothly when you manage your stress in a more mature way. What that means is that we are responsible not just for our behaviors, of course for our thoughts, because our thoughts lead to our actions, but also to our emotions. We're responsible for those because they affect other people, and because we're letting them control us and control the decisions that we make. Covey says, if I really want to improve my situation, I can work on the one thing over which I have control, myself. And that's the bottom line is in all of this, is that until I say to myself, I have control over my decisions, which leads to responsibility for the consequences, we can never truly fix the problems that we face. We can never face up to, yes, I created this, okay, now I'm going to change it. Covey reminds us that we can do this. He says, we are not our feelings, we are not our moods, we are not even our thoughts. The very fact that we can think about these things separates us from them. There is something in us that is above and beyond what we're thinking about and how we're behaving. It's something that allows us to analyze those things and to change and transform them, which is the uniqueness of the human race, which is what sets us apart from everything else on this planet and allows us to be self-improving. Now, Lauren Schwartz, in their book, talk about some wonderful things about responsibility and about looking at ourselves in holistic ways and improving ourselves through taking on greater responsibility. In order to perform at our best, we must access pleasant and positive emotions: enjoyment, challenge, adventure, opportunity. Emotions that arise out of threat or deficit, fear, frustration, anger, sadness, have a decidedly toxic feel to them and are associated with the release of specific stress hormones, most notably cortisol. They go on to say that depression is the most insidious of all negative emotions. And I've experienced depression, and it closes you off to everything, including yourself. It shuts down your entire life, and it really is like a poison. I remember once getting very upset, very, very upset about something that felt like it was out of my control, and I didn't want to have it happen, and then it happened, and so I was really angry. And I remember that I gave into those emotions to such an extent that I walked into the room where my husband was, and I looked at him and I said, I feel like I've been poisoned. Because that's what it is. It really is literally a toxin. And it changed something in me and for me forever, that it was the catalyst for being able to begin to respond to certain situations in a more adult-like manner, because I recognized I did not want to feel that way again. And you have to make that conscious choice. I'm going to choose differently for myself in my future life. I want things to be different and better, so I'm going to change them. George Washington is the most perfect example of a life full of taking on greater levels of responsibility. He was a surveyor in his teens, a full-time job away from home, taking complete responsibility. By the age 18 and 19, he was buying up land, bought up land all his life. When he was in the war, he volunteered to take a letter across country, dangerous, rough country in the middle of the winter. Over and over and over again, it was a diplomatic mission to the Indians. He wrote his rules of civility to try to improve himself and his manners in company, to help other people feel more comfortable in his presence. Of course, he took command at the war, and he commented later that if he would have known what kind of soldiers he was going to have, he probably would have never volunteered. And then, of course, he helped with the Constitutional Convention and took on the role of the president, the first president of the United States, for 2 terms. And then, one of his greatest acts, stepping down from the presidency after 2 terms, not becoming a king, and showing how a president should do things and setting a precedent. He increased in capacity and influence because they're connected. They can't be separated. The level of responsibility that you take on is the level of influence that you have, and when you use that responsibility well, when you're a leader that others can follow, then your influence grows and grows and grows. Again, from Do Hard Things, without a doubt, pushing yourself to do more than is asked, expected, or required is nearly always a lonely choice. It can set you apart from friends, co-workers, other Christians, even family. As we'll see, the desire to do your best, even when no one around you requires it, takes a special kind of character. It puts you at odds with the accepted culture which says just do your best, but means something very different. Think about it. This common phrase, just do your best, actually encourages the opposite. When someone says just do your best, are you inspired to reach for more? Or does it feel like permission to just get by? We say, hey, I did my best, but did we really? More likely what we mean is, hey, I gave it a shot, and that'll have to be good enough. And I've seen this with myself, with my children, with other people, that it really is true. When you say just do your best, it really feels like license to not actually do your best. And when we set things aside and say, well, I just did my best, we're actually giving ourselves permission to be more mediocre rather than really striving. In the Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz, whose worldview I don't entirely agree with, but he says some really valuable things in that book. And he talks about doing your best. He explains it as taking action, as not being complacent. And I love how he says it. He says, action is about living fully. Inaction is the way that we deny life. Inaction is sitting in front of the television every day for years because you're afraid to be alive and to take the risk of expressing what you are. Expressing what you are is taking action. You can have many great ideas in your head, but what makes the difference is the action. Without action upon an idea, there can be no manifestation, no results, no reward. I know a woman who is a good woman. You know, she doesn't go out and do bad things, and she's raising nice children. But she got a job at a fast food restaurant 25 years ago. She still works there. She doesn't even manage. They wanted her to manage, but she turned them down. I know another woman who's been a bank teller for 30 years. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. In fact, maybe it's a good thing if in other areas of their lives these individuals are taking on greater levels of responsibility and self-expression. If they're taking, these ideas of, I have an interest in toll painting, and therefore I'm going to take some classes, and as my ability increases, I'm going to paint things and give them as gifts, and maybe it's going to become a service I give, or maybe I'm going to sell them, or things that force us to come out of ourselves and do things we've never done and take on new challenges are very, very good for us. Even if we fail, our capacity has increased and we have learned and we have grown, which if there's out learning and growth, then there's really no point to living. You're really not living, you're sitting. You're staring, you're not becoming, which is what we should be doing. Lauren Schwartz again. And speaking of an emotional renewal, they say this: television, for example, is one of the primary means by which most people relax and recover. For the most part, however, watching television is the mental and emotional equivalent of eating junk food. It may provide a temporary form of recovery, but it is rarely nutritious, and it is easy to consume too much. And that's why we just decided early on in our marriage that the temptation was too large, that it was too easy to flip channels, and so we just have never tapped into television because the temptation to use our time that way is too great. And so many people maybe need to remove it, reduce it, do something so that they don't look back in later years and think, well, I watched a lot of shows, but did I become what I could be? And that's, and so, rather than having those regrets and beating ourselves up, we just start right now. We start today. I had a period of time where I watched tons of television. It was what I did with my leisure time, and I turned that around. I changed that. So whatever it is for you, you make a decision. I'm going to make more of my life, and so you reduce the things that are temptations to waste your time, and you insert better behaviors into your time. Inaction is anti-growth, and therefore it's anti-life. We want to take action upon the things that are interesting to us and do things into the world, Every time we make choices that don't challenge us, every time we choose the easy or lazy way out, every time we don't ask, what good things should I be doing? And then take time to do it, we're shrinking, we're being reactive. Covey says reactive people focus their efforts in the circle of concern. They focus on the weakness of other people, the problems in the environment, and circumstances over which they have no control. Their focus results in blaming and accusing attitudes, reactive language, and increased feelings of victimization. The negative energy generated by that focus, combined with neglected areas that they could be doing something about, causes their circle of influence actually to shrink. So where we had influence before, we can shrink that influence by not taking advantage of opportunities to act on our talents and gifts and interests, take on greater responsibility, and therefore grow and become more. And do hard things. There's a list of things outside your comfort zone that you can do. These are hard things that you can do to increase, that are outside your comfort zone to increase your capacity. You can do things beyond what is expected and required. If you have some responsibility in the community or in your family or at work, then there's these parameters of this is what's going to get you by, and you do more than that. You brainstorm how to improve in that area, and then you go and you do it. You could finish a hard project. You don't have to do things around the house your spouse has been asking you to do, or your parents haven't asked you to do. The second thing is things that are too big to accomplish alone. Starting an organization, doing service projects, fighting bad legislation, any cause that requires multiple people to get on board and work together. It improves your relationship skills and your organization and leadership skills, and therefore your capacity. The third thing is things don't earn an immediate payoff. Fighting bad habits, working out, eating healthy, reading your Central Classic, continuing education. Those are things that you're not going to see results until 6 months from now when you've lost some weight. But they make you feel good today, and the payoff is long term. And 4, things that challenge the cultural norm, changing your home environment, saying no to TV, supporting ideas like homeschool that are unpopular, sharing your beliefs openly. These are all things that people don't encourage you to do. They go against the cultural norm sometimes, but they're right, they're true, that what you're doing is in line with principle, and so you do it anyway. And it's a hard thing to do, and doing these 4 hard things increases your capacity as you take on greater responsibility so that you can do and be more. The Ayers, in their book Teaching Children Responsibility, give my favorite definition of responsibility. They say, responsibility means to become mature in the sense of being responsible to family, to self, to society. It means being responsible for all aspects of our lives and our situations, for our talents, for our potential, for our feelings, for our thoughts, for our actions, for our freedom. Responsibility is not the result of maturity, but the cause of it. And so we want to become more mature in the world as we take on greater responsibility, and that's my challenge to you.